The complaint had only 7 words, but when my manager read them aloud, the entire office went silent. "I can't stop noticing you." I was standing 3 feet away, staring at the woman who had filed it, trying to understand how the person who had spent months avoiding my eyes had somehow become afraid of seeing me. What I didn't know was that her complaint wasn't really about me at all, it was about a secret she had been carrying alone, and the truth would eventually force both of us to confront the one thing neither of us was prepared to feel. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. My name is Evan Mercer, and until that Monday morning, I had always believed that being unnoticed was one of the safest ways to live. I was 34, worked as a facilities coordinator for a large medical supply company in Columbus, Ohio, and had become very good at moving quietly through life. I arrived early, fixed problems before anyone noticed them, answered emails nobody wanted to answer, and went home before the building became empty. My father had taught me that a dependable man didn't need applause. He simply showed up. I had spent most of my adult life trying to become exactly that kind of man. 3 years earlier, my father had died unexpectedly while repairing a fence behind my childhood home. One moment he was complaining about a crooked post, and the next he was gone. After his funeral, my mother moved in with my younger sister, and I kept the house for a while because I couldn't bear the thought of selling it. Every room contained some small piece of him, his old work boots by the back door, his coffee mug with a chipped handle, the faded measuring tape he had carried for 20 years. Losing him had changed me in a way I rarely admitted. I stopped taking emotional risks. I stopped expecting people to stay. Even when I met someone I liked, some invisible part of me whispered that getting attached was simply another way of preparing yourself to be hurt. Then there was Claire Rowan. Claire had worked in the accounting department for almost a year before I really noticed her. She was 31, quiet without being shy, intelligent without making anyone feel stupid, and always carried a small blue notebook beneath her arm. She wore her dark hair tied back at work and had a habit of pressing her lips together whenever she was concentrating. We rarely spoke beyond ordinary workplace conversations, but there was something about her that stayed with me. Sometimes, when I passed the accounting offices, I would catch her looking at me. The moment our eyes met, she would turn toward her computer as if she had been caught doing something wrong. At first, I assumed I was imagining it. Then it happened again. And again. She would glance at me in the cafeteria, look away in the elevator, and suddenly become fascinated by a stack of papers whenever I walked into the room. Once, I held the elevator door open for her, and she froze for half a second before stepping inside. She quietly thanked me, but her fingers tightened around that blue notebook so hard that her knuckles turned white. I wondered if I had somehow offended her. Maybe I had spoken too sharply during a maintenance request. Maybe I had accidentally invaded her personal space. Maybe she simply disliked me. So I did what I thought was the respectful thing. I gave her more distance. That seemed to make everything worse. For several weeks, Claire began appearing in places where I worked. If a printer jammed near accounting, I would receive the service ticket. If a light flickered in the hallway outside her office, I would be the one called to replace it. None of it was unusual because it was literally my job, but every time I arrived, Claire seemed uncomfortable. She would watch me for a moment and then leave the room. I began to feel self-conscious. One afternoon, I mentioned it to my friend Marcus, who worked in shipping. He laughed and told me I was probably overthinking it. He said maybe Claire had a crush on me. I laughed too, because the idea seemed ridiculous. I wasn't the kind of man women secretly admired. I was the guy who remembered which supply closet had extra batteries. But Marcus's joke stayed with me. And then, on that Monday morning, my manager asked me to come into his office. He closed the door. There was a printed document on his desk. He looked uncomfortable and asked me to sit down. Then he explained that Claire had filed a formal workplace complaint concerning my behavior. My stomach dropped. I asked what I had supposedly done, and he pushed the paper toward me. The complaint said that Claire felt uncomfortable because I was constantly appearing in her vicinity, watching her, and making her feel as though she was being observed. I stared at the words. Then my manager said something I would never forget. Claire had also written a sentence at the bottom: "I can't stop noticing you, and I don't know how to make it stop." I felt humiliated. I had never followed her. Never watched her. Never deliberately sought her out. In fact, I had spent months doing the opposite. For the rest of the morning, I walked around the building feeling as though everyone knew. I avoided the accounting floor completely unless absolutely necessary. I ate lunch in my car. I kept my head down. But the worst part wasn't the complaint. It was seeing Claire afterward. She was standing near the reception desk, holding her blue notebook against her chest. When she saw me, her face changed. She looked frightened, then ashamed, then almost heartbroken. I expected her to walk away. Instead, she whispered that she was sorry. I told her I didn't understand. She looked toward the receptionist, then back at me, and said that neither did she. That answer followed me home. For the next several days, our company separated our work areas while the complaint was reviewed. I was furious, but underneath the anger was something more painful: confusion. I kept asking myself what I could possibly have done without realizing it. I replayed every interaction, every hallway encounter, every elevator ride. Then I remembered something. 6 months earlier, Claire had dropped a photograph near the cafeteria. I had picked it up and handed it to her. The photograph showed an older woman sitting beside a hospital bed. Claire had looked at it for a long time before putting it away. I wondered who that woman was. The answer came unexpectedly. My mother called me on Thursday afternoon and asked if I remembered the name Evelyn Rowan. I nearly dropped my phone. She told me that Evelyn had been one of my father's patients. My father had been a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center before he died. He had treated hundreds of people, but there was one patient he mentioned often: an elderly woman who had suffered a stroke and whose daughter visited her every day. Her daughter, he said, was remarkably devoted. I asked my mother if she knew the daughter's name. She said Claire. Suddenly, everything changed. I drove to my mother's house that afternoon. She showed me a box of my father's belongings that I hadn't opened since his funeral. Inside were handwritten notes, old appointment cards, and several thank you letters from former patients. One letter was from Evelyn Rowan. I read it twice. Then I saw my father's handwriting on the back of the envelope. He had written, "Claire needs someone to remind her that she is allowed to live her own life." My chest tightened. I asked my mother what that meant. She told me something she had never mentioned before. Evelyn had been diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition. Claire had spent years caring for her, putting her own career and relationships aside. My father had become one of the few people Claire trusted. After his death, Claire had apparently struggled badly. She had lost the one person outside her family who made her feel seen without demanding anything from her. Then my mother said something that made my hands go cold. Claire had attended my father's funeral. I had never seen her. She had stood at the very back. She had watched me carry my father's coffin. And she had never approached me because she was afraid. I asked why. My mother sighed and said that Claire had told her she felt guilty because my father had once asked her to promise that she would stop sacrificing her entire life for her mother. Claire hadn't been ready to hear it then. But after he died, those words haunted her. And somehow, without either of us realizing it, I had become a reminder of him. Not because I looked exactly like my father. Because I had his mannerisms. The same quiet way of listening. The same habit of fixing things without being asked. The same slight tilt of my head when someone was struggling to explain themselves. Claire hadn't been watching me because she wanted to frighten me. She had been watching me because she was grieving someone she had lost. And that was why she had filed the complaint. She was terrified that her grief was turning into something she couldn't control. I returned to work the next morning and asked my manager if Claire and I could speak with a mediator present. He agreed. We sat across from each other in a small conference room. Claire looked exhausted. Her blue notebook rested unopened on the table. She apologized again, but this time I stopped her. I told her I had been angry because I thought she believed I was dangerous. Her eyes filled with tears. She said she never thought that. Then she finally told me the truth. After her mother died, Claire had started noticing me everywhere. Not because I was following her, but because she was looking for pieces of her mother and my father in ordinary places. She had noticed the way I helped an elderly delivery driver carry a box. She had noticed that I fixed a broken chair in the break room instead of throwing it away. She had noticed that I always called my mother during lunch on Wednesdays. Those tiny things reminded her of my father. She said it made her feel safe. And then it scared her. Because she realized she had begun waiting for those moments. She had begun hoping to see me. She had begun caring. And after losing so many people, caring felt dangerous. I sat there quietly. Then I told her something I had never told anyone at work. After my father died, I had spent years believing that grief meant holding tightly to the people you lost. But my father had taught me something else during his final year. He had told me that love wasn't supposed to become a locked room. Love was supposed to become a door you could walk through. Claire cried then. Not dramatically. She simply covered her face with both hands and let the tears fall. I didn't reach for her. I didn't want to cross a boundary she had worked so hard to create. I just stayed. For the first time, she didn't look away. The complaint was eventually withdrawn after the investigation found no evidence of harassment or inappropriate behavior. But neither of us pretended that everything magically became normal. Trust doesn't return because someone explains themselves. It returns because someone keeps showing up. Over the next few months, Claire and I became friends. Slowly. Carefully. There were lunches where we talked about ordinary things. There were afternoons when she told me stories about her mother. There were moments when we disagreed and moments when one of us needed space. Nothing happened quickly. And maybe that was why it mattered. One Saturday afternoon, Claire asked me to help her clean out her mother's house. We spent hours opening drawers, sorting photographs, and deciding what should be kept. Near the end, she found an old photograph of my father standing beside her mother at the rehabilitation center. On the back, my father had written a sentence. Some people enter our lives to help us heal. Others remind us that we are still capable of healing. Claire read it twice. Then she looked at me. She said she finally understood why she had been unable to stop noticing me. She wasn't really noticing me. She was noticing hope. I didn't know what to say. So I told her that maybe Hope had noticed her first. She laughed through her tears. It was the first time I had ever heard Claire laugh. Months later, we were sitting at a small cafe during a sunny Saturday afternoon when she reached across the table and took my hand. She told me she was afraid. I admitted that I was too. She asked whether I thought two people who had both lost so much could still build something beautiful. I told her that I didn't know. Then I squeezed her hand and said maybe we didn't need to know yet. Maybe we just needed to keep showing up. That was how our relationship began, not with flowers, not with some perfect romantic moment, and certainly not with a complaint that sounded like a love confession. It began with grief. With misunderstanding. With fear. With two people carrying ghosts they didn't know how to put down. And eventually, with forgiveness. A year later, Claire and I stood together in my father's old backyard. The fence he had been repairing when he died had finally been replaced. Claire had brought a small wooden plaque for the garden. On it were the words, "For the people who taught us how to stay." She placed it beneath a young maple tree. Then she looked at me and said she had once believed noticing someone meant losing control. Now she understood that sometimes noticing someone simply meant recognizing a piece of yourself you thought had disappeared. I hugged her. And for the first time since my father's death, the backyard didn't feel like a place where someone was missing. It felt like a place where someone had been remembered. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. Sometimes, the person we misunderstand the most is carrying a pain we cannot see. Sometimes what looks like rejection is fear, what looks like distance is grief, and what looks like an ending is simply someone asking for time to heal. We cannot always know what another person is fighting inside their heart, but we can choose kindness before judgment, patience before anger, and forgiveness before resentment. Because love doesn't always arrive when life is easy. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through broken people who are still learning how to trust, reminding us that even after loss, betrayal, and heartbreak, there can still be another chance to begin again.